I'm David Lennonhawk, and this is Dave's Film Faves. Yep, still need a theme song, and a title card that's not made on MS Paint, since that's being discontinued. Anyway, so the last episode I did an obscure Canadian film, so to change it up this time, I'm doing an obscure Canadian film, but this one's a comedy. This one is called The Trotsky, starring Jay Baruchel. You can see him. You know, from Man Seeking Woman and that movie where he has a crush on Alice Eve. I can't remember the title of it, but that one wasn't too bad. Anyway, this movie, back when I had Netflix that sent discs in the mail instead of just streamed, I was looking for movies with a communist theme, and it was like The Trotsky with Jay Baruchel from 2009. I've never heard of that. So I rented it, and I found it really, really funny. So eventually I bought the Blu-ray. Again, this is one of those other movies where the Blu-ray is only available in Canada. How do you know that? Well, because the only rating on the disc is the Canadian rating. And if my camcorder would focus, you'd be able to see that. So it was rated 14 for coarse language and substance abuse. Cool. So, there's not many communist-themed comedies that I can think of, so being a full-fledged communist myself, I was very intrigued by this movie, and then when I rented it, I thought it was really good. This is essentially a John Hughes coming-of-age movie, sort of, but with a communist spin. The director has described it as Reds in high school. I wouldn't go that far, it's not that much, but the humor is definitely going to be appreciated by leftists more than other people, so I don't know how people who aren't at least intermediately versed in leftist politics are going to find it, but I just found it really funny. Anyway, let's see what the movie's about. So, Jay Baruchel plays a guy named Leon Bronstein, and if you don't know your history, Leon Bronstein is the actual real name of Leon Trotsky, who is the head of the Red Army and number 2 in command of the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. I wore a shirt to showcase this. Bronstein gets a job at his dad's factory, his dad played by the great Saul Rubinek. And when we begin the film, young Leon is trying to unionize the immigrant workers in a hunger strike, which doesn't go well because the workers are hungry and they want to eat lunch. As sort of punishment for this, or retribution for it, the dad takes him out of his cushy private school and enrolls him in the local public school. This movie, by the way, takes place in Montreal. So there are some people who speak French and some bilingual actors, though the vast majority of the movie is in English. When he's at the public school, he is given a little pep talk by the principal, who is named Principal Burkoff, played by Colm Feore, who you may remember from Stephen King's miniseries Storm of the Century. And at first, Leon decides he's going to keep his nose clean and sort of get through things, but then he sees an ad for the student union, and as a good leftist, he's like, unionize the students. But it turns out to just be what an actual student union is, which means they basically just plan dances and things like that. He also notices that the principal's staff is rather fascist-like in enforcing things like dress code and being late to school and everything, so sometimes Leon goes to detention even though he wasn't given detention in order to show solidarity with his fellow students. Beyond that, he starts to make a little bit of a ruckus, fighting against the bourgeois powers of the school, starting a dance with the theme of social justice. And in that dance, my favorite line of the movie, which I use not in my daily life, but rather often. See, Leon has a foil named Dwight, played by Jesse Rath, who seems to second guess and not particularly like Leon all that much. And Dwight approaches Leon and was like, "Hey, you threw a girl out who was dressed as Ayn Rand," and Leon says, "This is a fascist-free zone, Dwight," and that line I use so much, especially now with Trump and his fascist supporters sort of run amok in the United States. Again, this movie was released in 2009, so, almost 10 years ago, so it's even more timely now, plus it was Canadian, so... But in any event, there are a lot of quotable lines like that in the movie, especially if you are a leftist like me. Being a non-tanky and hating tankies, there is the line of, I have nothing but contempt for Stalin, as you well know, which I have to bring up a lot, since a lot of people, especially in the United States, just equivocate all communist thought with Stalin and his gulags and authoritarian, state capitalist fascism that called itself communism. But I digress. But it's hard not to discuss politics in a movie about a communist high school student. Leon, believing himself to be the reincarnation of Leon Trotsky, thinks his life is actually going to mirror the actual Leon Trotsky's quite closely. And that is why he ends up getting a crush on a girl named Alexandra, who apparently has the same name as Leon Trotsky's first wife. He meets her when he goes to try to enlist the support of a sort of a middle-aged leftist college professor. Think Bill Ayers, but not someone who blew up stuff for the Weather Underground. And at first he's like, I'm not joining your cause, you little kid. So we have Leon, who is, chasing after this girl, who is, by the way, about maybe 10 years his senior, maybe a bit more, while also trying to radicalize the student base. And then we basically have this theme of whether people do not fight for their rights because they are either ignorant or apathetic or something like that. And so it has sort of an interesting attempt at politics by wondering, what actually is wrong with the youth. I mean, I guess that doesn't hold up quite well because, in the post-Trump and also post-Bernie Sanders United States, young people are getting more active in politics and leftism. I mean, the rise of Antifa. I have an Antifa button that I've had on my coat for like 2 years and nobody knew what the hell it was, and now they're all over the news because of Charlottesville and fighting back against these neo-Nazis. And just getting sort of involved in like large-scale protests and things like that. Plus, I mean, even like the silly stuff like the online meme community and stuff. There's a lot more of that sort of leftism going on right now than there was. I think people became complacent under the sort of socially liberal centrism of Barack Obama, who, even when he was, drone bombing Yemen illegally and doing some pretty nasty stuff on the international scene domestically, he was actually pushing the bar into a bit more liberal way. So, by the way, Obama, president I have mixed feelings about, but he's still probably the best president in my lifetime, and I've lived through Reagan and the 2 Bushes and Clinton and now this fucking asshole we got now. But again, I'm trying to stay on the movie and I digress. But the movie is really funny if you're into this kind of thing. And if you're not into this kind of thing, you're probably not going to get much out of it. It's not particularly original as far as coming-of-age movies go, and I tend to like coming-of-age movies in general just because my own coming-of-age in my teenage and early 20 years were not particularly happy, and I didn't have the experiences that characters in these movies do, so part of it is me longingly living vicariously through characters. Like, I never led a socialist revolution in my high school to fight against the fascist people. I did have a kind of fascist principle, and I did get suspended for doing something about it. But that's a story I'm not going to get into on this movie review. But it's really just a light, funny comedy that has this political humor injected about it. But it's not a hammer you over the head with politics movie, though. It's not like watching John Hughes meets Michael Moore or anything. I mean, if you're not a leftist, you might just find it silly and sort of chuckle at it if you're still familiar with leftist terminology and the history and the people involved in like the early communist movement. Or you might just find Jay Baruchel sort of charming in how he really sells it. He basically plays the movie as if he's Warren Beatty in Reds. He's not winking at the camera or anything like that. Hi, Carl. I have a cat named Karl Marx, so obviously I'm into communist stuff. He's trying to get a hair tie in the closet, and that's why he's meowing during my movie review. Love you. That should get me a couple hundred extra hits. Anyway, but this isn't unlike Exotica, the movie I did in my last thing, where there's a lot of deep themes to pull apart and all of that stuff. The Trotsky is just a nice, light, fluffy comedy, and it's just because it ends up touching on topics that I personally care about and am personally knowledgeable and invested in, I got an extra layer of humor out of it. So is it a great film? Is it one of the funniest comedies ever made? No, I wouldn't go that far. But because it deals with things that I am personally interested in, and not many films, especially comedies, deal with that sort of stuff, and because Jay Baruchel just is really trying his heart out. This is like the best thing I've seen him in, and he's one of those comedic actors who he's good in almost everything, but he hasn't like been able to reach the stratosphere of like really famous or really respected comedic talent. He's just sort of like the friend of Seth Rogen and This Is the End and stuff like that. So I keep hoping he's going to become more successful. That Man Seeking Woman show was really funny, but you know, it was only on a couple seasons on FX and didn't really, you know, capture the cultural zeitgeist or anything. So he's still sort of looking for that one breakout role, I think. But yeah, I mean, he's really funny in this. And it's just overall, I mean, you have a great supporting cast in this film, and it's unlike anything that's really out there while still being beholden to the same sort of tropes, you know, whether it's like Animal House against the Dean, this is, you know, against the principal and all that stuff, but because it has this little leftist tilt to it, it's really funny. So if you are into that sort of thing, if you know leftist politics and stuff, or if you just like interesting coming-of-age movies, because they don't seem to make them like they used to in the 80s. You know, pretty much, I'd say Mean Girls was sort of like a watered-down version of, extremely watered-down version of Heathers, but that's sort of the last coming-of-age film or high school John Hughesian type movie I've seen that sort of captured, to an extent, the feel of those movies. Nowadays, any movies aimed at teenagers, like these teeny bopper stuff, actually, I take that back. Easy A with Emma Stone would actually be the last one. That one I actually quite liked a bit. So that's probably the last one. And that one specifically called out the 80s too. There's like a montage. They have the Don't You Forget About Me song from Breakfast Club. That one is specifically trying to emulate those films. I wish they had released the R-rated cut with more swearing instead of the PG-13 cut. I feel like that would have been funnier. But I digress again. But a lot of these other ones, like these teeny bopper movies, as I could derisively call them, they seem to take more from like MTV's The Hills or something like that than they take from these standard like 80s coming of age tropes like that. And I mean, there's a long list of ones I can steal that are maybe on the more dramatic side that are good. What's that one with Miles Teller? The one where he's an alcoholic. Spectacular Now. That was a really good one. And you got a couple of, The Way Back was pretty decent. Basically, the main character is the worst part of that movie because he's kind of bland, you know nothing about him, but there's great supporting characters around him, including Sam Rockwell. But so, as someone who likes these coming-of-age movies, and there will probably be a decent amount of coming-of-age films in this series of favorite films. I have a couple already coming to mind that I'm not going to mention here, so they're a bit more of a surprise. But of that sort of, I wouldn't call it a dying genre, but of a genre that's not to the heights that it used to be. The Trotsky is a pretty funny one, and because it's Canadian, it didn't get an American theatrical release, to the best of my knowledge. It kind of played the festival circuit. It's not really well known. This Blu-ray is not readily available. It kept being out of print and then back in print on Amazon, and then I finally got it at an affordable price. But I would recommend this if everything I've been talking about is something that perks your interest. If it doesn't, if you don't care about, if you don't find communist references funny, if you don't like Jay Baruchel, if you don't like coming-of-age movies, if you don't like high school comedies and stuff, it's not for you. But it was for me, and that's why I'm presenting it to you. So, I haven't picked a movie for the next episode, but I'm going to make a concerted effort to not make it an obscure Canadian film. So, it might not be American, but it's definitely not going to be Canadian. I promise you that. There will be other Canadian movies in the series. This next one will not be Canadian. So, that's it for now. Thank you for watching this, and